Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for your interest in the clinical psychology courses here at the Ken Miller Institute, and for taking the time to join us for today's course information sessions. My name's Mung. I'm the academic registrar and head of student services here at the Ken Miller Institute. And I'm very happy to be able to also welcome Professor Richard Moulding, who's our course coordinator, as well as Deb Adelin, one of our current student representatives. I think it's really valuable to hear from experience and insights from current faculty and students. So really value having their contributions and their insights today. Before we get started, I do want to provide an acknowledgement of country and recognize that Ken Miller is founded on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri peoples of the Kulin Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and acknowledge their deep, enduring connection to land, waters, and community. We acknowledge the richness and value of their accumulated cultural knowledge spanning vast expanses of time, and extend this respect to all Indigenous peoples of this continent and adjacent lands, as well as to any First Nations people who may be here today or who may be interacting with the material that we'll discuss shortly. With that, I want to pass it to Professor Moulding to kick us off and talk about why Ken Miller.
Excellent. Well, thank you everyone for coming along. It's great to get to chat to you today. Well, Ken Miller, I mean, it's an interesting place. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have the wide name recognition of a university, but it's actually been around for a long time, since 1961. It's a small institute that focuses purely on psychology and psychotherapy. So it's often I get the question about, well, what makes Ken Miller different to a university? And I mean, obviously, all training programs have a mandated sort of core content, but I mean, it's a little bit different as an institute in terms of rather than being, like at a university where it's one small course in the corner of the university, being probably in a big health faculty, which is just one faculty amongst many faculties within the university. Ken Miller is focused purely on psychology and psychotherapy. It's focused on teaching and training in psychology and psychotherapy. It's focused on providing therapy services for people at low or no cost options, and research in those areas as well. And so from that perspective, you learn from experts, you learn from practitioners. We've got high quality facilities and great average ratings. It's really worth mentioning that Ken Miller is a not-for-profit as well. So it's a registered charity. So your student fees go back into training and research and provision of services. They don't go into anyone's pockets or anything like that. It offers tailored support services. We've also got slightly outside of the program, but it's certainly got professional development, supervised training, all other sorts of training programs going on. And not for profit and focused on those three aspects. Okay, so just a more general background. You're probably fairly familiar with this, but psychology is a regulated profession. You can't just get up tomorrow and call yourself a psychologist. You get in trouble if you try to do that. You've got to be, it's a protected title, so you've got to be registered by APRA to become a psychologist, and that means that you've got a minimum of 6 years of education and training. I presume most of you here already have or are close to finishing your 4th year sequence, so your honours year or equivalent. And after that, you can choose a variety of different pathways to becoming a registered psychologist. But if you want to specifically get a clinical psychology area of endorsement, then you've got to undertake a clinical psych postgraduate degree, be it of the kind that I'm talking about today, or, if people who are generally registered can also do a post-registration master's that Ken Miller's offers, but I'm not going to talk about those today, but we do have that as a pathway as well. All right, so this kind of just steps through that in a little bit more detail. So, as I said, after your honors, which is sort of in the middle, you get to choose the 5+1 pathway, and after that you do a registrar year, or you do the 2-year clinical masters pathway, or potentially a 3 or 4-year doctorate pathway. And after the 5+1 and the endorsement year, you can register as a general psychologist. You can also do that straight out of the 2-year clinical masters. But then to get the area of practice endorsement, then you do an additional program of 1 or 2 years, 2 years for most people who are doing the masters. There is also a research pathway as well. That's a PhD. But if you do a research pathway, that's sort of more a gateway to doing further research-based work. That doesn't get you into, like, you don't get practical training in a research pathway. So it's a very different sort of pathway, but certainly a valuable one, but again, a slightly different path there. Okay, so I've added this slide just because we did get a number of questions about what's the difference between, say, the 5+1 program, which is the MPP program, and the MPsych clinical. So there's similarities and there's differences between those kind of pathways. And in many ways, the MPP is like the first year of the MPsych clin. So the MPP is a 1-year program, typically has 1 placement. How that runs varies. So some places have that as a simulated placement. For most of our MPPs, they do actually a practical training placement, 300 hours with 50 direct client contact hours. But to be eligible for registration, you've got to do an internship year, which we also did offer through an MPPP, although that's being phased out. You've got to do the national exam after the MPP. Ken Miller's version of the MPP has a face-to-face version. There's also an online version in the MPP, but it's a combination of live seminars and pre-recorded material. Generally, if you're MPP, then you get general registration and not eligible for endorsement. And at least currently, that means that clients get a lower Medicare rebate. Courses do tend to be bigger for the MPP, but it's generally a little bit easier to get into. Whereas the MPsych Clin is a 2-year program. So as I said, the first year is quite similar to the MPP, although there's slightly more placement. And overall, there's a lot more placement. There's 1,000 hours in total. You register after graduation, so you don't need to do the internship year. Don't do the national exam. Currently, outside of a couple of units, it's all face-to-face at Ken Miller. Higher Medicare rates for your clients. And then you can get endorsement after a registrar program. So that's specifically as a clinical psychologist. Because of the extra placement, people who do the MPsych courses tend to be smaller as well, just because and often I get asked this as well by students, students don't source their own placements. And so because we're sourcing all those placements for you, that's a bit of a cap on how many people can get in. And this is always a question as well. So the intake is around 30 students, and it tends to be a little bit more difficult to gain entry. Okay, so what makes this course unique? So as I said, benefit from a high quality learning environment. There's a breadth of coursework subjects. So obviously we teach CBT, but there's also coursework units in third wave therapies. And we've got a unit in short-term psychodynamic work as well, which Deb, who's here with me on behalf of this current students, is currently undertaking. This lecturers are practitioners, so the real life case studies or real plays, as one of our lecturers denotes them. Knowledge of contemporary practice, a robust placement program, links to employment. Ken Miller also has a number of clinics, so most of our students will go through in one of their placements, one of our clinics, which are in 4 locations: East Hawthorn, Dandenong, North Melbourne, and Mingari. Things like, there's most students can get a parking relatively easily. There's common student areas. We've got, and we've just refurbished a Serenity Lounge for students to chill out in as well. And as I said, it's a smaller kind of institute, so everything around is geared in some way towards psychology. I don't know. Did you want to jump in and add anything, Deb? I should note that. So I'm here with Deb, who I think mine introduced at the beginning. So Deb is a current student, so she can offer her perspective on how it's been going through.
Yeah, Rich, I was actually going to jump in and Deb, I know we chatted a bit in advance of this session, and there have been a couple of questions that folks raised when they first registered for the event tonight. And so tied to this slide, I was curious from your perspective as a current student, what did you feel when you were applying? What did you feel set Canmillen apart from some of the other universities, and what in particular drew you to the clinical psych program?
Good question. Welcome, everybody. Lovely to chat tonight. So what set Canmillen aside? Well, I was particularly interested in an environment that was really dedicated to small classes and having the lecturers know us really, really well, and building great relationships with lecturers and course coordinators, and not being a little fish in a big sea, but rather being a really important and integral part of the community at Canmillen. So that's something about the size of Canmillen, and that they're very, very focused, as Rich mentioned before, on psychology and other courses like counselling. And so this is a really specialised and dedicated institute dedicated to this particular work. Your second question, Meng, sorry, just escaped my mind.
No, what drew you specifically to the clinical psych program?
The clinical psych program, yes. I'm a mature age student, and I'm also a clinician from Allied Health in another area. And what drew me to clinical psych was that I actually liaised a lot, working in multidisciplinary teams with clinical psychs, and I was really inspired by their work, and I wanted to do what they were doing. So that's really what drew me into clinical psych. I love the idea of a longer course, giving me the opportunity to really develop my competencies, and compared to the slightly shorter course with the Masters of Professional Psych. Yeah, that's one of the reasons. Oh, let me just jump in. Sorry, just before I go. Rich mentioned that it's a competitive process, and it's competitive to get into both Masters of Professional Psych and Masters of Clinical Psych. And, just from the perspective of being a student applying for both and seeing what I could get into, I was really at peace with the idea that what I was offered was what I was offered was, I was going to choose from what I was offered, because it is so competitive. And so those of you who are perhaps not quite sure about the professional psych or the clinical psych program, perhaps, apply for both and see what happens, but really have faith in the process. And I wish you the very best with your applications.
Thanks, Deb. I will just really say a couple of questions already started coming through the Q&A. So I do really encourage folks who are here today to take advantage of this opportunity to ask questions directly to Deb and Rich. So we'll continue to moderate the chat in the meantime. But Rich, I'll pass it back to you to talk through the selection process.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, so selection process. So what do I need? So you apply directly through a portal. You do need a minimum WAM of 75 in your 4th year. In practice, that tends to be a little bit higher. So it was around 78 last year. It is a very competitive course. And you include in that your academic transcripts, both of fourth year and undergrad, and anything else you've done. I know a fair few people have done other bits and pieces along the way as well. Also put in that your experience as well. So there's a couple of free text boxes where you type that in. You can also upload a resume as well. Proof of identity and citizenship status as well. And international and domestic students are not differentiated in the selection process, but there are English language requirements mandated for the profession by APRA. So if you do come from a non-English background, then obviously you'd want to consult that to make sure that you've got that the proof of meeting those standards. And if you are studying overseas as well, you'll need to get APRA to give the recognition about the equivalency of the training pathway you're currently undertaking as well, which can take a little bit of time. So you want to leave time for that. And then after that, then so you put that in, so your experience. You also need to get references as well through the Hotspur or HBA system. So that's the typical system that everyone is using. So if you're applying elsewhere, you've probably already put them in for that. So you need just to tick boxes to get a professional referee and academic referee for that. We don't mandate that people include a personal statement just because, you know, I mean, to be honest, a lot of times a personal statement just says exactly the same thing that's in the resume anyway. But sometimes people do want to put that in if there's extra sort of context that you might want to add in terms of your journey in. So really that's an option, but you can include it if you wish. And so once you've gone through that system and get shortlisted, then you go to a selection interview with a couple of us as well. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, so I've kind of touched on this already, but so shortlisting is based on your academic record, both undergraduate, postgraduate, so first 3 years and the fourth year, which might be a postgraduate year or it might be an honours year. Previous work experience and training. I mean, obviously, we're not expecting applicants to be already working as psychologists or something in the field, but you know, some people do have a breadth of experience. We would expect people to have at least some direct experience, be that volunteer or, you know, working the phone somewhere or working support groups or something along those lines. And that's kind of important because it's good from your perspective to know if you're putting all your life towards this, that you kind of have a feel about what you're in for as well. Academic and professional referees play into that, and personal statement, as I said, is optional, so you can include that or not. It won't disadvantage you if you don't, but you can put it in if you want. And then a short listing of interviews, which includes, you know, a response to the interview questions and obviously any other personal qualities as well.
Before we move on from the selection process, I might actually pose this question to both of you. I'd be curious to hear from the experiences or thoughts from a student versus faculty, but a few prospective students were wondering what that selection interview looks like. So that, Deb, I might pass to you first. What was your experience of the selection interview in terms of what was the conversation like and how did you prepare? And then also just broadly across your entire application, what would be your advice to prospective students on how to make sure that they're presenting themselves in essentially the best light across all aspects of their application?
Mm-hmm. I'll start with the second question first. So in terms of preparing your documentation for application, when it comes to your CV, really put the effort in to have a good think about the experiences that you have and develop your CV so that it reads really well, it's interesting, optimize your skills, your competencies, to really showcase who you are and what you've done. The personal statement, I know that Rich mentioned that perhaps that you don't need to do this, but I at the time when I was applying, I did. And so I spent quite a long time refining it as if it was an assessment that I wanted to get a high distinction on. I just wanted to have the paragraphs run smoothly and to again showcase my experience and how motivated I was to be in a course at Cairnmillar, and putting myself really ahead so that I could stand out, hopefully. And in terms of so preparing the documentation for your application, I would suggest that overall, to get in early, start working on it as soon as you can. Sometimes the process takes a little longer. When you're preparing for your interview, write down questions that you think that you might be asked and practice them. I like the idea of practicing things over and over so that they feel really comfortable, and I get a little stage fright sometimes. So to work with the stage fright, I want to have something at the tip of my tongue that I can just start talking about and appear and feel confident that I'm engaged in this process of the interview, and I'm really excited to be a part of it. Well, Rich actually was one of my interviewers. I'm not sure if you remember. And then there was another colleague of Rich's. And so I found the interview process to be warm, relaxed, friendly, engaging. I was given the opportunity to speak, to share a lot about my life, why I'm interested in doing ClinPsych at the time, and my experiences. The questions were really stimulating for my mind, and I really felt that it was a conversation. So I hope that helps you.
Terrific. Yeah. Well, from an interviewer perspective, I mean, what does it look like? So, sorry, we jumped ahead, but so normally there'll be, most of the time there'll be two interviewers. It's done via Teams, typically, unless Teams breaks, which it occasionally does, and we have to resort to Zoom or similar, but largely by Teams. It's around a 20-minute interview. There's, some of the questions are about sort of experience and aspirations, and there's a couple of little clinical vignettes as well. But obviously we don't expect people to be trained clinical psychologists, because otherwise what's the point of the course? Rather, it's just to gauge people's reasoning and reactions to those questions. And really, yeah, obviously we've already read all the prepared materials, so we've got a lot of ideas from that as well, but we're more interested to hear about your own journey and goals in your own words, and also your reactions to those on-the-spot situations. And probably, one thing generally to avoid is just I guess the online process can mean that people have written notes and things, but it really doesn't. It really does come when you ask a question and someone just reads out a prepared script. So I guess just being prepared is good, as Deb says, but also making sure that you are sort of there and present and reacting to the questions as well. Yeah. Okay. Excellent. So this is just an outline of the rough course structure. Of course, all subject to change, particularly the timetable days. So don't book an immovable job just because these days are written down. Timetabling influences that, but this is what we're looking at the moment. So the first semester is really geared around a lot of preparatory kind of units to make sure that when you get to placement, then you have some basic building blocks and skills ready to go. So there's a unit that James Collard runs on CBT processes and interventions. So that's done in a more of a transdiagnostic way. And students do really enjoy that. It's sort of one of your first real therapy units. There's a unit on psych assessment, diagnostic testing, and interview competencies. That one's quite a difficult unit, so students do find it a bit of a stretch because there's a lot of technical kind of information, particularly around the standardized tests and how they're run. So that can be a little bit tougher to get your head around, but an important aspect of practice. The third main unit is on psych ethics, and so that unit now runs as a combination of pre-recorded material plus live tutorials. And so students have enjoyed engaging with that and the different sort of process of delivery. People have actually appreciated that. There's also then you start doing your research project as well. And you also have alongside that some placement ready workshops that cover things like working with diversity, working with young people, working with routine outcome monitoring, deliberative practice, working with diversity, counselling skills, and so a series of workshops that are meant to help you gear towards placement. So that's part of the placement unit. Second semester, then you have most students will start the placement proper in second semester around July or August. And so placement in first year, you'll either be at one of the 4 clinics that I mentioned earlier or at a school, so a primary or a secondary school. In second year, then you will do the flip of that. So if you did clinic, then you'll do a school. If you did a school, then you do the clinic. And the final placement, just to finish the placement sort of idea, is in second semester, and that will be in a more complex setting. It might be in a community health, it might be in private hospital, it might be in sort of a public system, it might be a headspace, forensic settings, all sorts of different places people end up, but it will be a more complex setting. So you've kind of got the more sort of structured, and then I guess as you're one semester away from getting out and working in the real world, it is geared towards making sure that you've really amped up in that regard. The other, throughout the remaining semesters, you'll continue your research project. So the research project is a 5,000 to 8,000 word research thesis, so quite a traditional thesis model. So the length is often quite similar to how you would have done in your 4th year, but the nature is a little bit different. So, and people do a variety of different things in a variety of different areas, but so some might be quant, some might be qual, there might be systematic reviews as well. But the two things that probably distinguish a master's thesis from a honours thesis is that in some ways, you can focus more on the research because you're not just, what are my marks, what are my marks, what are my marks? So you can think more about what the research is actually meant to do in the real world. And you've got more opportunity to collect real world data and things like that, depending on the nature of what you do. And it's also over a longer time frame as well. So again, there's less stress around that. Sorry, something's just appeared over the screen there. I'm not sure what that is. There it's gone. And then, yes, and then you've got other coursework unit across the remaining semesters. So second semester is child and adolescent psychopathology, and there's some research method lectures in there as well. And you also present your master's work in one of those classes. Second semester then is more extension kind of units. So one is on what's called interpersonal processes and therapeutic interventions, I think is the actual name of that unit. That's kind of a little bit of a vague term, but really it's about sort of, third wave approaches, for example, ACT, there's a lecture on EMDR, there's a couple of lectures on schema work, there's some stuff on frameworks of practice. Adult psychopathology and intervention is both presentation and then sort of disorder-specific approaches for therapy. And then in second semester, there's units on short-term psychodynamic work and health psychology, because even though health psychology is a area of endorsement, there's only one health psychology course left in Australia now, in Queensland, and so the majority of people working as psychologists in health settings are actually clinical psychologists as well. So that's a really important applied area to get experience in, or learnings in. Excellent. Now, so that was the whole MPsych program. We do also have the DPsych as well. So the DPsych is across 4 years. And so what you get extra in the DPsych is more placement. So there's placement across the final 2 years. There's a much larger research project, so that continues across the last 2 years as well. So word counts are a bit not as stringently applied these days, because we're more about the scope of research, but you know, you can think of it as a 30 to 40,000 word thesis with probably around 3 studies in it. And there's also another coursework unit as well on called Advanced Diagnostics and Interventions for Complex Presentation. So it's other specialized things that you might not have had in your more general MPsych units. Excellent. So I've kind of touched across this already in terms of the structure of the placements, so I won't labor the point. We don't use simulated placements across the MClin course. You do have to get a variety of experiences, settings across the lifespan, so, you know, child, adolescent, adult, that kind of thing. And there's some examples I've mentioned before down there as well.
So before we move on, Deb, I might pass this to you. There's a lot of questions around what placement's like. So what can you expect? What are the experiences like? Also, what are some of the kind of setting options or provider and partnership options? So curious from your experience, what was placement like? What are some of the placement components like?
Well, placements are putting what you learn in your lectures into practice. It's super exciting to be in the real world with real clients and patients where, again, you're applying your knowledge and building competencies in lots of different areas. I'm in my final placement now with 14 weeks to go, I think, before I finish the whole of the Masters of Clin Psych. And my very first placement was in a public school in a low socioeconomic area. And I had the amazing opportunity to work closely with the assistant principal and to build great relationships with teachers as well as families at the school, and to work one-on-one with 8 to 12-year-olds. It was really an extraordinary experience. They are experts, the children are experts in and of themselves, with so much knowledge and brightness and hope. And even despite all of the struggles that they're going through, they're just extraordinary people. And it was a real honour to be able to sit in a room and to work with them and collaborate towards better coping skills and, and hopefully making their life a little bit better. My second placement was at the Canmilla Community Clinic. I was across both the Hawthorn and the Dandenong clinics, which was great because it actually expanded the presentations that I was presented. It expanded the opportunity to have different presentations across the two quite vastly different areas, and that I was well supported by the coordinators. And my final placement currently is at Monash Health in a clinic. I'm at the pain clinic, but I'm working with very, very complex presentations right now in an interdisciplinary team, which is really my dream come true, to work with pain specialists, doctors, and physiotherapists, OTs, and dietitians, and other psychologists to collaboratively help people manage their chronic pain. It's a steep learning curve, but something that I really, really enjoy, because again, you get to apply the knowledge and the competency that you've built through the lectures and the tutorials, and you get to apply that in a real world setting. Things that I really take note of when I'm on placement is to make sure to ask lots of questions. If you're not sure, it's okay. You're a student. You're allowed to make mistakes and learn from them. I had a logbook where I kept writing the answers to the questions so I could keep reviewing them and really develop my competencies there. Build relationships with the key people on each placement. So, for example, the assistant principal was my key person at the school, and across the community clinic and the public setting, the team that I was working in, as well as my supervisors all the way across the placements, have been key people who have supported me and really helped me step up each time towards building competencies in the areas that we're all learning in. Any other questions that you wanted me to speak to for placements?
I might actually pose one to Rich. There are a couple of folks asking, what are some of the partnerships that Canmilla have? So what are some of the settings that are available? And how can student preferences be also accommodated when those arrangements are made?
Yeah, look, I mean, well, we've got a variety of different partnerships, and they can vary each year in terms of, organizations sometimes take students, they sometimes don't. Some places like Monash Health, for example, we have a particular relationship with across their health service. Some places like Headspace generally open up across programs, so they have like competitive interviews as well. For the school-based placement, primarily those are through in partnership with an organisation called Sykes and Schools, and Sykes and Schools have a great additional sort of wraparound support as well, and a fully implemented routine outcome monitoring system as well, which is a really great thing for students to learn. And then there's just a variety of different other agencies that people are that we have placements with as well, to just a whole number of them, and mostly they take 1 or 2 students at a time. In terms of student preferences, so I mean, well, everyone will go through the clinic. We try and, as much as possible, gear your location of the clinic around where you're situated. So, for example, if you're near Dandenong, then we'd try and get you into that clinic. If you're around Hawthorn, etc. So we try and take that into account. But I mean, obviously, that doesn't necessarily fully map up with the cohort. So some travel is always involved. All students will then go through a primary or secondary school. And again, those factors are taken into account, but it's also based on structural availability as well. And then where you go on your third placement, again, in the first year, you'll have a discussion with the placement coordinators about the kind of places you're interested in, and they'll try and line you up as best as possible with an area of interest. So, for example, we don't necessarily have students in forensic settings every year, but occasionally we have students who demonstrate an interest towards that. So we'll try and facilitate that if possible. But I mean, it's not like there's hundreds of placements out there and it's just like picking off a menu or something like that. There's always enough placements. It's always organized. There's been no issues with that, but it's not I guess one thing to remember is that, maybe you end up in a private hospital and you prefer to a headspace or something like that, and that does happen. But I guess equally, you're there for 6 months, so it's not a career; it's a learning opportunity, and and often we actually find that students who might, like, for example, one example is students saying, well, I never want to work with young people. I'm just really not interested. And then they actually go on that placement and they're like, actually, I really enjoyed that. I'm surprised by that as well. So it's important to keep an open mind, and there is some serendipity in terms of, you might find that something you didn't think you'd actually like, you do end up liking. So, that all plays into it as well. And, obviously once you finish, then moving into whatever area, I mean, you never stop learning in psychology. It's a lifelong learning model, always PD, always learning, always supervision. And so, there's plenty of opportunity afterwards to pursue a dream job or something if that's not the placement you end up in. But equally, I mean, it's not uncommon that students will end up getting employed by a placement agency, particularly a final placement agency as well. That certainly happens reasonably often too. And even like some of our past students are now working back in our own clinic. So, that also happens. And our clinic is not just a student clinic, it has students alongside sort of paid practitioners as well. And so that's also a nice sort of nexus too. Like, you've got a lot of informal consults alongside, your formal supervision, which you also have. Excellent. So I mentioned the research before. So there is a master's thesis across the 2 years. There's a whole variety of different topics that people can go into, depending on supervisor availability and the sort of things that you're interested in. So people always find something that they do and they always get matched up. And, there is some opportunity to bring in your own areas of passion as well. But, equally, that, of course, I mean, supervisors need to work within their expertise. So I've had it mentioned a few times already this year about, psychedelics, and we don't have any psychedelic research at Ken Miller, for example, but there's plenty of both qualitative and quantitative projects, so plenty to get your teeth into. All right, so I've kind of touched on the difference between the DPsych and the MPsych already. So as I said, the final 2 years involved 2 additional placements. So basically an extra 50% of placement hours, additional coursework and additional research, which is around 30 to 40,000 words. The final 2 years do have a scholarship. So that's not a stipend-based scholarship, but it does subsidize half of the cost of your units. People can, if they choose to do a DPsych, actually register after the first 2 years. If you've done equivalent to masters and done your first study, you can actually get generally registered, can even start working and getting registrar hours at that point as well. At the end of it, you get to call yourself doctor, which is attractive to some people, and also gives you a bit more flexibility to perhaps on teaching roles and research roles and senior clinician roles later in your career as well. All right. Probably most people here are not coming to hear about the PhD, but I'm also the PhD coordinator as well. So I thought it'd be remiss not to mention it, at least on one slide. So the PhD, as I briefly mentioned many slides ago, is a pure research degree. So you don't get master's training in a PhD. So it is more suitable for people who either are wanting to pursue a research-based career or a career that uses research, like working in government and policy, lots of places people can end up in with a PhD. so you're working under supervision to create a thesis that's nominally up to 80,000 words, although again, it's more based on scope than just counting how many words you've written down on the page. But typically it's considered around that scope and around 4 studies. We do have a by publication option, so it can just be 4 published pieces of work. It can be done 3 to 4 years full-time or 6 to 8 years part-time. And so it could be an alternative to a master's if you're more interested in doing research. We've also got, for example, one of our PhD students was finishing the master's when they started at Cam so they've come back and done the PhD afterwards as well. It might just be that you particularly want to do the research and particularly like some of the researchers that we've got working there, like you're really interested in work that, they're doing on, I'm just trying to think of an example. So Paul Jenkinson, for example, had Associate Dean Research doing work with eating disorders and virtual reality stuff and things like that. So it might be something of appeal. But yeah, if you look up our website in terms of, there's a tab where you can select sort of research supervision. You can find out the sort of things that people supervise in as well.
There are a couple of very specific questions that have come through the chat around research. So, Rich, I might just ask you if you can comment on whether or not there's any ongoing research into the transdiagnostic CBT model that Professor Norton previously engaged in, as well as how the clinical psychology program incorporates AI and research into AI as use in therapy.
No, well, I mean, so Professor Norton left the Institute last year, so his specific stuff on transdiagnostic, we're not supervising at Can Miller just because he would be supervising that. I mean, I have done some work in transdiagnostic stuff before, but from a slightly different perspective. In terms of, sorry, the screen's just gone a little bit strange there. In terms of AI, I don't think I'm not sure that we've currently got any projects looking specifically at AI in therapy, but it would really depend on whether there's any supervisors who have particular interest in that space. I don't see why we couldn't do something in that space, or some of our workers might get interested in that as well. I mean, we've certainly done things around, lots of different advances in therapy. Like, for example, during COVID, there was a lot of stuff about telehealth. So there was research projects that we had going on about client reactions to telehealth and about practitioners' work in telehealth and how they found it and their attitudes towards it. So equally, I mean, there could be work develops on AI at the moment. It's just I can't think of anyone who's specifically focusing on that, but it's possible.
So I might just speak to this briefly. There's been a lot of conversation around the study aspects of coming to Cairn Miller, but we also really want to acknowledge that there's a lot of supports, resources, and services that we do offer to students as well. So one space that you might have for folks who are international, we do really acknowledge that the experience of being an international student can be very unique. So we run a number of tailored social activities, workshops, as well as other study advice, just to recognize that transition might be very different for you. There are also a wealth of academic supports at the Cairn Miller Institute. So there are one-on-one learning consultations that students can book into, as well as ongoing academic skills sessions, workshops, and webinars throughout the year, just to support students in developing those study strategies and tips to maximize their ability to succeed. As well as learning equity supports. So again, recognizing that some folks may have either temporary or ongoing accessibility needs, or you might just experience something in your life that really does require some of that adjustment. So there are a number of different flexible study modifications that we can also consult with students just to make sure that you are able to access and engage in your studies in an equitable way. Lots of questions around tuition fees and funding. So I'll speak to it initially. As Rich mentioned at the beginning, we are a not-for-profit organization, but unfortunately we don't act as a public institution. So we don't unfortunately have CSP places, and we do our best to maintain kind of reasonable and accessible tuition fees. And there is, again, a scholarship available for the 3rd and 4th years of the DPsych program, which can act as a subsidy on your overall tuition amounts. There are a number of ways that you can pay for your tuition fees as well. So for eligible domestic students, you can allocate those amounts to your fee help balance. And there may be other external study loans or scholarships that students may be able to research or take advantage of through other organizations. Then lastly, of course, you can choose to pay for your fees upfront and direct. And again, where students require some flexibility, we can also speak with you one-on-one to identify either payment plans or other flexible payment options for students who do need some of that flexibility. So just a few key takeaways as we start to wrap up. And again, a reminder that if you do have other questions, please do make sure that you pop them through to the chat. But with some key details, a reminder that applications are already currently open and we've been making ongoing offers since August. So certainly, as Deb mentioned at one point earlier, certainly encouraging you all to get in early or to contact our applications team if you do have any questions or barriers to submitting your application. Again, fee help is available to eligible domestic students, and it is very much part of that APRA registration pathway, which Rich kind of talked through at the very beginning of today's conversation. Like I said, now is really your time to ask any questions that may have come through. So, Rich, I might start you off with, again, just some of your, I guess, top tips for prospective students who are really finalizing or putting their applications together. What are some key things that you would really recommend? I know you spoke to a little bit earlier, but I think a lot of people are really wanting to know how to make sure that they can maximize their chances.
What are some tips? Interesting question. I mean, I did mention already some tips around the interviews in terms of making sure that, you are present and you respond to the questions and try not to, I mean, preparing is good, as Deb said, but also don't have things sort of written out to do follow the questions that are asked, because I mean, later on you'll be a psychologist, and obviously you can't respond to clients with scripts and things like that. So it's important to respond in the moment to the information that's presented. In terms of preparing your application, I mean, a lot of that, I mean, obviously things like grades, and that is, you do the best you can. Picking references is probably the main thing that you do get free rein to do. I mean, most people will pick their 4th year supervisor, for example, as their academic reference, and then someone from wherever it is they're working or volunteering as a professional reference. Probably, I mean, I have been asked by people before, should I try and get someone, high up in the organization because they look esteemed? So I have heard that as a question before from students, and I think it's more important to get someone that actually knows you, because it doesn't matter how esteemed a eminent psychologist or psychiatrist is at somewhere where you're working. If they don't know who you are, they're not going to give you a good reference. So you do get to select your own references, so make sure it's someone that does know you well and can comment on your strengths and weaknesses as well. I mean, it's all right to have weaknesses, that's fine. Everyone does, but you want them to be able to actually know you and judge that, and you do get control over who you ask to be your referees. It's probably a little bit late in the piece really to be getting extra practical work. I mean, you still got a little bit of time, but you probably really don't have any time to onboard too much. And at this point, you probably want to be thinking about, particularly if you're finishing up your study, getting the best grades you can, because that's something that's harder to repeat. It's not uncommon that someone might, get to fourth year and then not get a position somewhere in the first time that they apply or wherever they specifically apply. And then going out and working in the field for a year, or you can do the MPP or something like that as well and get some experience through that, or you could go out and work for a year and get some sort of client-facing role, not as a psychologist, but drug and alcohol or family violence settings or counseling settings, or somewhere else. And then next time around when you apply, then you'll have a stronger application anyway, and you'll have more things to draw in the actual course. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. You do get up to 10 years to get into postgraduate, so you can also take a gap year as well if you feel like you're a bit burnt out and you want a bit of time to do something else. Probably those are the main things that I think about in terms of applications. I don't know if
Thanks, Rich. Deb, the next one's for you. Students are just kind of wondering, what is a day-to-day like? What are kind of the contact hours? How do you personally manage your study commitments amongst, some of the other things that happen in our lives?
Good question. I'll start with the first one. So what's day-to-day like? I'll perhaps speak to just sort of the broad day-to-day, because of course, as Richard has shared with us, each semester as we progress through the course, some of them are on different days and different subjects, etc. So the first lecture starts at 9 a.m. and it finishes at 12. So it's 3 hours long. 12 till 1 is a lunch break, and then 1 till 4 is your next lecture. Again, 3 hours. The lectures could consist of, traditional lecture style, where the lecturer is standing up instructing things from a board or a PowerPoint presentation, and we're working through different case studies or learning material. Or you could also have breakout groups where you're collaborating with your peers, perhaps 2, 3, 4, maybe a little bit bigger groups, where you're brainstorming ideas to questions posed by the lecturers, and then coming back to the class and sharing your findings, and which really creates a really nice, rich kind of environment where you can learn a lot from your peers, but also stimulates a lot of thoughts and discussions that definitely have helped my learning experience. There are breaks throughout the first lecture, the 9 to 12. There are various breaks. The lecturer can decide with the class what suits them best. Is it one longer break of 20 minutes or maybe 2 shorter breaks of 10 minutes each? And again, there's breaks in the latter series, this latter lecture, the 1 till 4. I like to get into Ken Miller early. Rich probably sees me do that. I'm in there half an hour to an hour early, but you don't have to do that if you don't want to. I like to do it because it just sort of, sets me up for a day where I'm feeling a bit organized before we start the lecture. My computer's loaded up with the lecture material and I'm ready to go. Perhaps I'm completing a little bit of work on the side just before the lecture starts. My experience with our cohort is that we've all invested a lot in getting to know one another and building a really cohesive team, not just because we're all at uni together, but also because we are genuinely wanting to be friends with each other and to establish strong bonds, which will then spill over into our working life, where we have developed strong referral networks with one another, of course, because we might be interested in different areas in clinical psychology. And if a client came along and needed some sort of an area that I don't work in, then I've got lots of names to give them to pass them on to some of my peers. So definitely invest in time in getting to know your peers, perhaps make 1 or 2 or more friends, and it really makes the whole experience that much more brighter. Your second question, Meng, sorry, or your first question.
The first question was, which you actually have kind of already responded to, which is just what that day-to-day looks like and how you manage it. I am also just conscious of time, and I know we've ticked across the hour. So I might just pose one last question. Thanks again. I know a lot of folks have been really keen to hear from both of you. So I really do want to acknowledge your time and your contributions today. But as we wrap up, I might just pose one last question to each of you individually. So Deb, from your perspective, if you were thinking back to when you were first applying, what is something that you wish you'd known? And that could have been about how to put your application together, but also, preparing for studies or the study itself. And then Rich, kind of similarly to an extent, what's one thing you just wish all new clinical students knew going into the program?
Maybe one thing that perhaps I wish I knew, but it's okay that I didn't know it because we only know what we know at the time, is that the process of becoming a clinical psychologist doesn't stop when you finish your master's. It's a continuous process of learning and developing and expanding your knowledge areas, your competencies. And I started here, and I'm astonished that after first year, I'd already developed so much knowledge and skills. And then after almost completing my second year now, I look back at myself at the very, very beginning, and I think to myself, look how far you've come. So in imparting this my personal experience to you, it's that be patient with yourself, engage in the process of learning. You will develop skills and knowledge and competencies as you go through this. And it's a never-ending learning process. And I'm glad that it is, because I love learning. And everybody that I come across as a client or a patient is so new and interesting that I'm fascinated by them and really would like to learn about them and learn how I can best serve them in psychology.
Excellent. What do I wish that, well, think that all students should focus on or know? It's an interesting question. I mean, probably the main thing that we like to talk about is probably the change from there's very much a change from the sort of fourth year mindset into a postgraduate kind of mindset. There's so much focus, and necessarily so because how competitive courses are, on chasing marks and chasing grades and competition and all that kind of thing in fourth year and undergraduate as well, which I mean is a bit unfortunate. I mean, you'd hope that learning happens as a byproduct, but it's a bit unfortunate that learning isn't the actual end goal. Whereas when you get into postgraduate, I mean, the focus is really about switching to, well, now it's a professional program, profession and training. And so really focusing on, once you do get in, on, getting the most out of the learning that you can, trying to get out of the mindset of chasing grades, trying to get out of the mindset of, marks are so important. It's more about what learning have you got? How do you get better? How do you develop these competencies better? What can you take away from this, rather than, just blindly chasing 2% mark or something like that, or trying to second guess what the lecturer is looking for so you can get a slightly better mark. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess that goes along with, obviously AI is creeping into all assessments now and all that kind of thing. But, again, it's if the mindset is less about, well, getting assignments done, and more about, well, what am I learning from this, and what will I take from this, and how will this help me be a better, more competent practitioner, then hopefully that also takes away the pressure to perhaps try and put something into ChatGPT or similar to get more polished prose in your response, or whatever it happens to be.
Thanks, folks. I know that was a very comprehensive discussion. And like I said, I know our prospective students will have very much appreciated hearing from both of you directly. So thank you to you both. And also thank you for all of you who participated today and for your interest. As it states, we really do hope to welcome you to the CanMiller community soon. So we'd very much encourage you to get that application through if you haven't already. and contact our admissions team if you do have any questions or need any support with that. One thing that you might also want to take advantage of is that we do offer one-on-one admissions consultations. So for students or prospective students who feel like they would really benefit from having a bit more of an individualized discussion about your personal circumstances or interest, do make sure to take advantage of those opportunities as well. But otherwise, we'll be sure to distribute a recording of today's session with folks who have attended. And if you do have any questions, just don't hesitate to reach out. But for now, thanks again for your interest and hope you have a great evening ahead. Thanks, folks. Bye.
Bye. Wishing you all the best.
Thanks all.